tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Two weeks ago, we looked at the turning of the wheel sutta, the Buddha's first teaching to his 5 ascetic friends, where he responded to their self-mortification practice by offering the middle way and saying that sensual indulgence was not the way, but neither was bodily mortification, and that the way to practice this balanced way of being was the Eightfold Path, and that the Noble Truths are what he found when he practiced in that way. The noble truth of suffering, the cause of suffering being grasping, the end of suffering being the cessation of grasping, and the path to the end of suffering being the Noble Eightfold Path. In the course of giving that first teaching, one of his friends opened the Dharma eye and exclaimed, "All that is subject to arising is subject to passing away." And his friend Kondanya, Anya Kondanya, became the first stream enterer after the Buddha himself. And so then they practiced together for a week in which the Buddha would teach them, and they would go for alms together, living together. They began the practice of living in community together. And the second recorded discourse he gave to them was the discourse on selflessness, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta that we looked at last week. So I guess we're doing this is sort of the first 3, and they're kind of a matched set here. So in the Anatta Lakkhana, the selflessness discourse, the Buddha says that if it's yours, you should be able to control it. You clearly can't, therefore it can't be called yours. The body, the senses, the mind, all of it is responsive to conditions. It's responsive to your volition, but not completely. No one can keep themselves from aging or getting sick or dying. No one can get what they want or prevent that which they don't want. You can't prevent tragedy from happening. You can't, have the thing that you want just because you want it. So really, this whole discourse, the not self discourse, is a further fleshing out of the First Noble Truth. Where the Buddha says, getting something you didn't want, not getting what you want, losing something that you love, this is suffering. This is dukkha. This is how it is. These things, they happen. And the important thing here, in this First Noble Truth, you didn't get what you wanted. You got something you didn't want. The important thing there is not that pleasant and unpleasant things happen. That's a given. The important thing there that makes it suffering is the wanting. Well, I wanted it. That's why it hurt. And so then he further emphasizes that and says, well, grasping, thirst, tanha, the second noble truth, the truth of grasping. And so we grasp at that which is not ours to control. And the epitome of this grasping is to think that something is mine or something is myself. Something defines my identity. This is so me that it could never be separated from me. That's painful, the Buddha says. That's going to be painful for you. And so at the end of that discourse, all 5 of his friends became fully liberated. They became arhants, the first 5 arhants. So then they set about building a community. And the first thing they do after that is they start talking to the people that are around them. And one of the people they run into is the son of the woman who gave the Buddha the milk rice on the eve of his enlightenment. Her name was Sujata. The son's name is Yasa. And he's kind of a party boy. He's rich. He likes playing. He's pretty unserious. He's got 50 friends who he parties with. And the Buddha converts him. And then converts his 50 friends. And so then there's 51 more people join the community. And then there's he does his biggest conversion yet. He meets up with 3 dreadlocked ascetics. So these are sadhus, these are ascetics, and they're brothers, and they're each teachers. So each one of them leads a group. And you can see a bit of a theme here with these first conversions. You know, the Buddha converts Yasa, who's kind of the ringleader of this group of 50 party kids. And when he goes forth, takes robes, becomes ordained, his friends just do it with him. So it's like you get the leader, you get the whole club. And so he does the same thing with this next group of converts. He meets up with these 3 brothers, and they're called the Kassapa brothers. I'm reading here out of Thanissaro Bhikkhu's biography of the Buddha called Noble Warrior. So he arrives, he travels with his new monks, and they arrive at Uruvela. And there's 3 dreadlocked ascetics that dwell there: Uruvela Kassapa, Nadi Kassapa, and Gaya Kassapa. Uruvela Kassapa leads 500 dreadlocked ascetics, Nadi Kassapa leads 300, and Gaya Kassapa leads 200. So 1,000 altogether, dreadlocked ascetics. And they are fire worshippers. So they do the old practice of Agnihotra, of the fire sacrifice, also sometimes called yagya. And so the Buddha goes to the kind of most prominent or eldest of the brothers, Uruvela Kassapa, and says, "If it's no trouble with you, may I stay the night in your fire hall?" So he stays the night there. And then over the course of the next bit, they have a supernatural power battle. The Buddha turns his body into flames and fills the hall, and eventually he starts doing miracles in a way, and they have a kind of a battle where Uruvela Kassapa has an ego. He keeps saying oh, this contemplative is powerful, but I'm more powerful. But his miracles keep failing, and the Buddha's miracles keep succeeding, and the Buddha makes all their fires go out, and they're like, oh no, he's so powerful. And then the Buddha makes all their fires light up again, and then all go out again. They do this for a while until Uruvela Kassapa just admits that this guy is more powerful than he is. And usually what would happen in those kinds of situations, I mean, this is what happens in all the Kung Fu movies, right? You meet someone who's more powerful than you, and you become their student. So this is a very old trope. So Uruvela Kassapa says that he's going to become the Buddha's student. And so the brothers, so when he decides to become a student, the Buddha says a thing that he always says to teachers when he converts the teachers. He says, don't go so fast. Usually the teacher says, oh my God, you're powerful or you're wise. Let me be a student of yours. And the Buddha really has this respect for institutions, actually. And he says, not so fast. If you just convert by yourself, impulsively, it's going to be really disorienting for your followers. You're a leader, you have responsibilities. Go back and talk with your people, talk with your students, tell them what's going on, and then come back to me, And in an interesting way, it's very similar to what he says when young people want to ordain. He'll say, go back and talk to your family. And so there's this respect for these teachers, actually. The texts make them a little bit out to be fools, they keep losing the supernatural power contest. Oh, you can't, turn your body into a conflagration of fire and then make it disappear. What are you, chopped liver? We could read the reports of these battles any number of ways, but one of the standard ways of thinking about this one is that the Buddha understands that these people respect a certain thing, and he actually kind of comes at them in their own language. Other people who were really philosophers or logicians, this happens a lot with Brahmins who come and they're all learned, they know all the Vedas, and the Buddha starts asking them logical questions, which is kind of their specialty, and he corners them with logical questions. These fire worshippers What they respect is supernatural powers. So the Buddha doesn't try to convert them with logical arguments, and he doesn't tell them the Four Noble Truths, the way that he did his first friends. He goes in with, all of his fires blazing. And only after he has really convinced them that he's super powerful, and Uruvela Kassapa goes back to his students and says, I'm going to go be a student of the contemplative Gautama. You can come with me if you want. Eventually, all three brothers and their 1,000 disciples all come to be ordained. And then the commentary tells us that the Buddha thought to himself, I need to teach these people in an idiom that they'll understand. So showing off his supernatural powers was not really a teaching. He was actually trying to get them to listen to him. And he had to do that just to get them in the room, in a way. But once he's done that, and they've converted, and the discourse makes a show of them cutting off their hair and beards and throwing all of their dreadlocks and their ritual implements into the river to be washed down the river. They all come, they're new monks. And then the Buddha gives this teaching, and it's this very famous teaching that comes to be called the Fire Sermon. And it's the Aditya Sutta, or the Aditya Pariyaya Sutta. So here's the beginning of it. They're staying at this place called Gaya Head. The Buddha addressed the mendicants. So he's addressing this group of 1,003 new followers. He says, mendicants, all is burning. And what is the all that is burning? The eye is burning, sights are burning, eye consciousness is burning, eye contact is burning. The painful, pleasant, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact is also burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fires of greed, hate, and delusion. Burning with rebirth, old age, and death, with sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. And then he goes through each of the 6 sense doors. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind is burning. And seeing this, a learned noble disciple grows disillusioned with the eye, sights, eye consciousness, and eye contact. And they grow disillusioned with the painful, pleasant, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact. Being disillusioned, desire fades away. When desire fades away, they're freed. When they're freed, they know they're freed. They understand rebirth is ended, the spiritual journey has been completed, what had to be done has been done. There is no return to any state of existence. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the mendicants approved what the Buddha said. And while this discourse was being spoken, the minds of the 1,000 mendicants were freed from defilements by not grasping. So that's the whole text. That's the whole Fire Sermon, minus a couple sentences at the beginning. So the Buddha does something that he would often do, which is he takes a literal image or action or situation, and he flips it into the psychological or spiritual register. And there's examples of this throughout the texts. There's an example where he's with a farmer and he's begging for alms, and the farmer says, I work for my food. I'm out here with my plow and my oxen and the yoke and the walking and my seeds and my crops. Like, I work. What do you do, ascetic? You're just begging for food, but you don't work. And the Buddha says, I too have done my work, and goes through and uses each of the farmer's references, spins them in the psychological. The mind is the goad, mindfulness the plow, effort is the oxen, and spins it into, I don't remember it right now, but like spins each of them into a quality in the inner life, a quality on the path. And the farmer gets it and says, the Blessed One has indeed done his work. And so here the Buddha takes this literal or material practice that these mendicants do, the practice of fire worship, and turns it into a metaphor for grasping. This is really a metaphor that has been active throughout his ministry. even already. It's probably the metaphor behind the aggregates themselves, the term khanda, meaning a heap of something, like a heap of firewood. So a bundle of fuel. So the aggregates are bundles, 5 bundles of fuel: form, feeling, perceptions, formations, consciousness. And in this discourse, the fuel is the senses, right? The material coming in through the senses. So he says, what's really burning? You know, you people worship fire, right? Let's investigate fire. What's really burning? What's burning is, and here he lays out a whole model of how we should think about the senses. So let's look at that list a little bit in detail. He says the eye is burning. So you can think of that as like, that's the organ itself, right? There has to be an organ for senses to happen. So the eye is burning. Sights are burning. So the thing that you actually see, there's the eye and there's sights. And then there's eye consciousness. And these 3 things traditionally are part of what's called the 18 sense bases. For each of the 6 senses, there's these 3 things that have to be present in order for conscious experience to happen. There has to be an organ of perception, there has to be something that is perceived, and there has to be consciousness awake to the perceiving. So like, you know, there can be an organ and sights, but not consciousness, for instance, and there's not going to be suffering in the same way. Like when I was a child, I was a sleepwalker. So I would open my eyes, get out of bed, I would walk around the house. My eyes are open, they're seeing enough for me to not bump into things, but I was not registering it. There wasn't the eye consciousness wasn't awake. Eye consciousness was asleep. You know, there can be eye consciousness and objects, but not a working organ. You know, there can be eye consciousness and a working organ, but pitch darkness and not much to see. So these 3 things are present to make the experience of seeing happen: the organ, the object, and consciousness. And all, if you put those together for each of the 6 senses, you get this list that some discourses go on about, the 18 sense bases. This discourse goes a little further, and it says, in addition to those 3, there's eye contact. Some of you will recognize the word contact from the cycle of dependent origination, where when there is a sense door, like the sense door of the eye, there's not just the object that the eye sees, but there's a moment of encounter. There's a moment of contact. You know, there's a moment when the seeing, the consciousness, the organ comes together into a kind of communion with what is seen. There is eye contact. And contact in dependent origination, so there's the 6 sense doors, they are followed by contact, and they're followed by Vedana, or feeling tone, hedonic tone. And this is pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And so when there is eye contact, there comes right on the tail of that, almost instantaneously, and only in very, very, very deep meditative concentrated states can you interrupt this link. There comes the interpretation of that contact, the interpretation of that experience as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So I see something. There's a beautiful painting of Krishna that a friend gave us over there in the wall, and it's in front of me all the time when I'm teaching here, kind of oddly. I'm not entirely sure why. I'm teaching the Dharma from the Pali Canon, and the image that I always see if I look up is Krishna. Hare Krishna. But there you go, there it is, and it's beautiful. So that's partly why it's there. It's really pleasurable to see, and I have a pleasurable heart feeling for Krishna. But the Vedana comes right away, right? So if I open my eyes and there's that painting, there's contact. So like there's the eye, it registers, there's the object itself is there, consciousness is awake, and there's this moment where all of those flash together and I connect with what I'm seeing. And immediately with that, it's like boom, and it's pleasant. And so that that's a series of events, mind moments. It's a series of experiences that, with a lot of concentration, you can start to break down. But even with a little bit of mindfulness, what you can notice is that these things are all happening. And so what the Buddha then lays out, right, is that these three base level aspects of sensing, the eye, the sights, and eye consciousness, are burning. Eye contact itself is burning. And then the painful, pleasant, or neutral feeling that arises conditioned by eye contact is also burning. So all of that stuff is burning. And then burning with what? Burning with the fires of greed, hate, and delusion, right? Burning with rebirth, old age and death, sorrow, pain, lamentation, grief, and despair. All of this is this is really the, this is burning with the first noble truth, really, right? Burning with suffering. So what is it about these things that's burning? Burning with the fire of. So what is the fire? What is the fire that's burning? So the fire of greed, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion. It's not random that greed, hate, and delusion parallel Vedana, grasping, aversion, and delusion. Grasping arises instinctually when pleasant experience is encountered unconsciously, right? We like pleasant things. You like pleasant things. I know you do, right? Because you're a pleasure programmed animal. You're that kind of animal. And so there's such a natural push toward grasping when we encounter the pleasant that it takes a lot of mindfulness to see that link. So independent origination, as many of you know, we've studied a bit before, it's really at the heart of the Dharma. There's this sequence, right, from the sense doors, the 6 sense bases, then contact, make contact with the world through the senses. Then there's Vedana, feeling tone, hedonic tone, affect, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So with contact, right on the heels of contact comes the charge that contact bears. And then right on the heels of that comes the reaction, the reactivity of the heart. If there's pleasant, I want more. If it's unpleasant, I want less. And even to say it's pleasant, I like it, right? That can be a slide. Like, it's pleasant, I like it, I want it. It's unpleasant, I don't like it, I don't want it. And it's neutral, I don't notice it, or I don't understand it, and I can be deluded. I might even have a kind of grasping relationship to neutral, especially if there's been a lot of trauma, but actually I'm deluded. I might think that I'm equanimous, but actually I'm overwhelmed or freezing or collapsed in some way, where I'm in a kind of unemotional fog. If I dig a little bit, I'm going to find the unpleasant. I'm going to find the painful. So neutral is slippery, which is why it tends toward delusion, toward non-understanding. And so this whole sequence then is charged by where it's heading. And where it's heading is toward rebirth, old age, sickness, death, sorrow, pain, lamentation, grief, and despair. That's kind of one long word in the Pali. It's one big run-on. So you can just let it bubble off the tongue, like, sorrow, pain, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. And so the process then that the Buddha points to for this grasp. So first he breaks it down. He says, for all the senses, this is how it works, right? This is what's burning. All of these things are on fire. Remember, these are people who used to put lots of substances into the fire to burn them. He says, here's all the substances, right? The eye, sights, eye consciousness, contact, Vedana, all burning. Burning with what? What's the fire? What's actually the fire? The fire is greed, hate, and delusion. And then he gives a sequence that points toward liberation. So, seeing this, a learned noble disciple grows disillusioned with the eye, sights, eye contact, eye consciousness, and eye contact with the painful, pleasant, and neutral. So, the first step, in a way, is disillusionment. Welcome to the most cheerful of Dharma topics. The first step is to become disillusioned with the objects of the senses, the sensual experience. Disillusioned is an interesting word that it can, some of you might take it as mostly being negative. Some of you might take it as being very positive. Literally disillusioned, right? To come out of illusion, to come out of misperceiving things. In a way, it's a very precise technical term here, right? See things as they are. So this thing is unpleasant. It doesn't say anything about my being a terrible person. It doesn't say anything about what the future will be, because it won't last. It's simply unpleasant. It doesn't even say anything about my being happy or satisfied or at peace. All of those things are illusions that we've spun out of the experience. Yeah, disillusioned, disenchanted. Yes, I take them as essentially synonyms here. So being disillusioned or disenchanted, I love the word disenchanted, right? Like break the spell of that's being cast upon us, and of course here I'm thinking, if we spin it in the positive direction toward a deep, animist faith, there's that beautiful book by David Abram, The Spell of the Sensuous, and it is a spell, right? To be engaged with and intimate with the material world, there's a beauty and extraordinary intimacy in it, and it is a kind of spell, and it's not bad, right? But the result of it is further presence here, right? The Buddha is saying that disillusionment leads to the fading away of desire. When desire fades away, you're free. And when you're free, you know that rebirth has been ended, right? It all goes back to the ending of rebirth. So nothing here says that being intimate with the world is bad. It simply says being intimate with the world is going to make you stay in it, be reborn in it again and again and again and again. And the Buddha has recognized that endless rebirth is more painful than pleasant. I think that's really the spin that we get from these his descriptions of seeing the endlessness of rebirth. There's something about the infinite time length in the descriptions of rebirth that recasts the pleasant for us. I think it's really tempting from a modern, postmodern, humanist, animist framework to say, I accept the unpleasant because it also is mixed with the pleasant, and that's embodied life. Like, that's just the truth of embodied life. I'm down with that. Like, that's what you get. That's what I'm here for. And I feel warm toward that response to existence. Like, that feels right to me. But I also know that time is really long. And if we take time length really into account, things get put into perspective. And so, for instance, let me take what's a pleasant experience that is very, very, very short, maybe a wonderful taste, let's say, not to get too, dramatic on our pleasures. You might have others, but let's say a wonderful taste, a taste you really like. Let's say it's a taste that you've tasted for your whole life. You first tasted it as a little baby, you tasted it throughout your childhood, then throughout your young childhood and your adulthood, all the way through till now. Maybe you still love it, but how excited are you about it still? Like, would you be willing to just continue living for a long, long, long time with all of the difficulties and challenges of life in order to experience this taste again and again and again and again and again and again and an infinite number of times? I think part of what is hard for us who have not seen with direct experience the reality of participating in the infinite round of rebirth is that life can actually seem like a pretty good deal. There's a good mix of pleasant and unpleasant if you're privileged enough to have a good amount of pleasant in your life. And I think about how, we talk a lot about how the Buddha rejected bodily mortification as the path to his friends. We don't talk as much about how he rejected sensual pleasures, like rejected wealth. He was really comfortable. He was privileged. And I think part of what set him on the path, really the first thing that set him on the path, was seeing that his privilege was not enough to guarantee his happiness. And so can we be clear-eyed enough, disillusioned enough about our privileges that we lose the taste for endless rebirth? And maybe we really appreciate this life in this time. And if you don't become fully enlightened in this lifetime, you're going to return a few more times anyway. So don't worry about it. Don't get too scarcity minded on lives. But there is a disillusionment with endlessly experiencing sensual existence that is built in here. And if we see that, that's really the edge of freedom here, right? Whatever we connect with about the Dharma, it all comes down really to this. This is the relationship between the second and first noble truths, that the uprooting of craving leads to freedom. And so, but it's fierce here, it's stark. And it's interesting that this is what he's giving to these, these fire worshiping ascetics. They're ascetics. They're not actually devoted to sensual pleasures in the way that we think of, and that you might be, that I sometimes have been, am, but they're devoted to something that is not the ending of rebirth. They've been devoted to something else. Why do you do fire sacrifice? You do it to achieve certain goals, to merge with the divine in certain ways. You want something, right? It's an offering, and it's a request in a way toward the divine. And he comes in and says, become disillusioned with all of the sensual connections that you're making, pleasant and unpleasant. And with disillusionment, desire fades. Desire fades. And with the fading of desire, there's freedom. So this is one of those discourses where there's such an intense, I feel this intense pressure whenever I teach in this direction, teach on a discourse like this, or whenever we get into the territory of disillusionment, the ending of desire, to really do the tantric maneuver, which I think it lets one escape the ferocity of this teaching. And the tantric maneuver is to propose that if one enters into a non-dual frame of mind, one doesn't actually have to give up anything in order to know the truth of this disillusionment. That everything can be just as it is, and there can be no grasping, even in the middle of engaging in all the sensual pleasures and avoiding the pains. That should be possible with a radically liberated mind. And And I think that's true. But my mind isn't radically liberated in that way. And so what I notice is that there's a very strong temptation to use that teaching as a way to reject disillusionment, to reject the ending of desire as being not necessary anymore. That actually, I think it's just more grasping, but I really want a path to freedom that doesn't ask me to stop desiring things. And the pressure as a teacher in a very privileged culture, and in a spiritual marketplace, is like if I teach this discourse without tempering the message, I'm like, oh, next week there's only going to be 3 people here. Like you don't want to hear this. Nobody wants to hear this. And so then I think we work really hard to make it understandable, because I'm not a dreadlocked ascetic fire worshiper. I do have to translate it to the modern milieu and figure out how to understand this from within the culture that I'm in. And this particular discourse is fairly straightforward, and it's actually I actually have to really pretzel myself if I want to get out of what feels like the real insight at the heart of the teaching, which is that that it all comes down to the second noble truth. It all comes down to grasping and desire, and wanting, and that there's really no way to be truly free from endless rebirth and endless repetition of grief and despair, loss, other than to recover from the habit of compulsive desire and grasping. And so I think that's the translation that we are asked to make if we want to engage with a teaching like this. It's like, how do I even wrestle with that in my life as it is, in my marriage, in my culture, in my political world? There's so much to want and fear. What would this mean for us to really take this on? What does it feel like when, can you feel the truth of that, of the tantric side of it? What does it feel like when you are engaged but you're not grasping? Could you be fully engaged in the political cycle right now for the next year without being terrified or elated or somehow tied in knots by the prospect of either winning or losing this thing? That's hard to do. Can you fully engage with your sweetheart if you've got one of those, or with a close friend, or with your kid, or whatever you got, or with your community, in a world where things burn to the ground? And can we find the, talk about a supernatural power, right? The ability of the heart to be at ease in the world and truly happy, truly at peace in the middle of all of this. So I hope that I have not cushioned the blow of this sutta, but also haven't misrepresented the subtlety and complexity that it suggests for us, to really engage in the complexity of this practice in our real lives in a way that might actually be doable. So, all right, and stop there. Thank you.